Beneath the surface of an unremarkable stretch of land, shrouded in secrecy and abandoned buildings from the Cold War era, lies the SCP Foundation Research Facility for Unidentified Objects, Site-117, one of the many hidden research facilities hidden by the Foundation. This research facility housed the world's most unfathomable objects. These objects aren't yet fully understood by the Foundation's scientists, and thus the site's primary goal is to perform experiments and discover ways to either use their power or to contain them. Here in this crucible of the strange and the surreal, the brightest minds are tasked with unraveling mysteries that could either unlock new horizons for humanity or herald its doom. Dr. Elias Harrow, a neuroscientist who specialized in understanding the brain hemispheres and their unique functionalities, had been recently transferred to Site-117 to lead the efforts as the head of research to understand and crack the code of SCP-3249. His expertise in neuroscience promised him a front-row seat to the theater of the human mind. But what is peculiar about this task, and what surprised Dr. Elias Harrow the most, was that SCP-3249 wasn't an object. This anomaly wasn't even physical in nature at all. This phenomenon was yet being studied by several top-ranking individuals at the Foundation, and was not yet fully understood, but they had a rudimentary understanding of it. When Dr. Harrow was briefed about it, his expression and his attitude changed from excitement to absolute dread. Not only did the research depend on his expertise, but also this task given to him could change the course of humanity, for the better or for the worse. The briefing room at Site-117 was suffused with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Dr. Elias Harrow, renowned for his groundbreaking work in neuroscience, sat with an anticipatory posture, eager yet unknowing of the task that lay before him. Across from him, Dr. John Steinberg, a figure weathered by the trials of containment and research of anomalies beyond human comprehension, prepared to unveil a reality that would challenge every ethical fiber of Harrow's being. Steinberg began, his voice steady yet carrying an undercurrent of gravity. Dr. Harrow, what we're about to discuss, it transcends our current understanding of neuroscience and ventures into realms we've only begun to comprehend. SCP-3249 is not a mere object or entity. It's a phenomenon, an anomaly that resides within the human mind itself. Harrow's brow furrowed, his initial excitement giving way to a creeping sense of unease. An anomaly within the human mind? John, my work has always been grounded in the tangible aspects of neuroscience. What you're suggesting seems to border on the metaphysical. Steinberg leaned forward, the weight of his gaze meeting Harrow's. It's very real, Elias. SCP-3249 represents a dormant consciousness within the non-dominant hemisphere of the human brain. When activated, it can usurp the primary consciousness. The implications of this are profound, not just for neuroscience, but for our very notion of self. The revelation hit Harrow like a physical blow, his scientific curiosity clashing with the dawning realization of the ethical quagmire they were about to wade into. This is unprecedented, John, to tamper with the very essence of an individual's consciousness. Are we even equipped to handle the ramifications of such a thing? The tension in the room thickened, an invisible pressure that seemed to compress the air itself. Steinberg's voice took on a somber tone, a reflection of the burdens he bore. Our mission, Elias, has always required us to navigate the murky waters between knowledge and ethics. Yes, the potential for harm is significant, but so too is the potential for understanding, for advancement. We stand on the brink of unlocking secrets of the human mind that have eluded us for centuries. Harrow's hands clenched into fists, the weight of responsibility settling upon his shoulders. But at what cost, John? Are we to become arbiters of consciousness, toying with the very nature of who a person is? The line between discovery and desecration is very, very thin. Steinberg nodded, acknowledging the validity of Harrow's fears. Indeed, the line is thin, and we must tread it with the utmost care. Our actions are bound by the Foundation's principles, but within those confines we have a duty to explore, to understand. be easy, Elias. It will test the limits of our ethics, our resolve, and our humanity. I want no part of this experiment, said Dr. Harrow with dubious resolve. If my guess is right, this will completely delete any memory, personality trait, and experiences that an individual has lived up until that point. You are essentially formatting a brain. And I am guessing you already have a subject in mind and infinite ways to mess with their mind for the sake of understanding something we cannot comprehend? Dr. Harrow's face flushed as he finished talking, as if he had said everything he thought in one full breath. Elias, let me remind you that you signed an NDA before coming here to be a part of this research, as well as clauses that prevent you from backing down now. The consequences of doing so could be devastating for you and your family, said John with a serious resolve. I will leave you to it. I expect an answer in 30 minutes. You know where my office is. Dr. Harrow wasn't surprised to hear John's subtle threat, but he understood the Foundation wasn't bluffing. Their promises never came empty, and now he had no other option. As the meeting concluded, Harrow remained seated. The room silent now, and his only company being his own thoughts and fears. He took a sip of his now cold coffee, fixed his glasses in place, and took big, audible breath. He stared into a fixed point in the room as if consumed by his own thoughts, the silence only interrupted by the humming noise of the 30-year-old fluorescent lights. All right, I guess I have no other choice, Elias mumbled under his breath. He briefly looked at the cameras directed towards him, then stood up, grabbed the coffee cup, and chugged the remainder of the coffee in one big gulp. Let's get to work, he thought as he walked past the main doors that remained ajar from the previous meeting. The task ahead was monumental, a journey into the heart of human consciousness itself, where the distinction between savior and destroyer was as blurred as the anomaly they sought to understand. The tension of the conversation lingered, a harbinger of the challenges to come, as Harrow stepped into the unknown, guided by a resolve to navigate the ethical precipice that SCP-3249 represented. After Harrow expressed to John interest in continuing with the research, mainly to keep his family out of harm's way, he was given a classified folder that contained all the relevant information about the anomaly up to the current date. The people who initially discovered the anomaly did so during post-procedure evaluations of lobotomized patients in the 1940s. It wasn't classified as an anomaly, but it was classified as a side effect of the procedure at the time. If the SCP-3249 activated on a patient, they would present with confusion, often described as a complete change in personality. SCP-3249, as described in the Manila folder, is a region of the brain said to be located somewhere in both hemispheres. Some anatomical findings suggest it might be located within the corpus callosum, the part of the brain that connects both hemispheres, but this information remains dubious at best. This portion of the brain remains dormant until activated under very specific conditions. A secondary consciousness, hidden somewhere in the dormant parts of the brain, dominates the one currently present on the individual and ultimately overtakes it. The affected individual changes into a whole new person with different personalities, desires, and likes. It is unknown why, but this phenomenon often results in the activation of a much more sinister, hidden part of the subconscious. Psychopathic behavior often follows the diagnosis, and these individuals often present with violent tendencies as a result. As Harrow finished reading the Manila folder, he had devised two methods of activating SCP-3249, the brain region responsible for the seemingly complex brain disruptor. The first criterion involved the interruption of cross-hemisphere communication within the human brain. Harrow imagined the delicate, intricate networks of neurons, the silent whispers of thought passing from one hemisphere to the other through the corpus callosum. To sever these connections was to silence these whispers, isolating each hemisphere in an unprecedented act of neurological segregation. The thought alone was enough to send shivers down his spine, a visceral reaction to the violation of the brain's sanctity. Some chemicals developed by the Foundation's researchers could achieve this interruption on a short-term basis, but at a terrible cost. Side effects led to rapid mental degradation, a disintegration of the self that culminated in total brain death. The second criterion demanded the activation of the speech centers within the non-dominant hemisphere of the brain, specifically Wernicke's and Broca's areas. This stimulation, achieved through a technique known as Scholl stimulation, was designed to awaken the dormant consciousness to give it voice and dominion over the host and overtake it. Harrow envisioned the process, something only he could do. A meticulous and calculated intrusion into the brain's most private chambers, awakening something unknown, something that had been waiting in the shadows. The containment measures for SCP-3249 are as distinctive as the anomaly itself, utilizing a chamber encased in lead and fortified with a mesh of uncommon metals to neutralize its unsettling effects. This chamber confines Subject D6439, an unfortunate individual detained by the Foundation for experimental purposes. D6439, a 32-year-old man, ventured too far into the woods during a hike and inadvertently stumbled into a situation far beyond his control. Foundation agents seized him, alleging trespassing, and he has been detained at the facility for the past 2 years. His apprehension occurred as he was searching for a spot to set up a campsite for the night. Remarkably, the Foundation had been searching for a subject meeting the experiment's specific requirements for years. The recruitment of D6439 marked the end of this search, with Dr. Harrow's subsequent involvement serving as the final piece of the puzzle. Exactly 1 week following the briefing, the experiment was set to start. The technicians, co-scientists Dr. Harrow and Dr. Steinberg, were there to witness the unimaginable. The experiment room filled with state-of-the-art medical equipment systems meant to measure every single body metric from subject D6439, all with the goal of understanding the anomaly. One pre-procedure interview was conducted on the subject with the means of assessing the before and after psychological response to the experiment. In the interview room at Site 117, D6439 was seated across from an individual known only as Morris. The room was stark, the mood tense. "Hello, Subject D6439. I'm Morris, and I am part of team who will be overseeing your progress in the coming days," the interviewer began, their voice neutral. D6439, identified as right hemisphere dominant, looked puzzled. "What progress? I've got no idea what I'm supposed to be doing," he said, his confusion evident. The interviewer pushed a file across the table. "This document should explain everything. Please, take a look," they instructed, with a tone that brooked no argument. As the subject read through the file detailing SCP-3249, his unease grew palpable. "This has to be some kind of sick joke," he finally burst out, looking up from the papers with a mix of disbelief and anger. "It's not a joke," Morris replied flatly. "But this is insane. You can't actually be doing this to people," the subject argued, his voice rising in protest. "We've conducted the procedures multiple times already, but for obvious reasons they have all led to no answers. We believe you will be the vessel required to crack the code," Morris stated matter-of-factly, unswayed by the objection. "That's not right. There are laws against this sort of thing." D6439 was becoming increasingly agitated, their sense of injustice clear. "When you were apprehended and we presented the conditions for your eventual release, you agreed to the terms and signed the clauses of the contract," Morris reminded him, voice still emotionless. "But I thought it was temporary." This is permanent," D6439 exclaimed, realization dawning on them. "The procedure is set to begin tomorrow. It will be done in stages and you will need to rest in between. Security will take you to your quarters now," Morris concluded, effectively ending the conversation. D6439's protests grew more desperate. "Please, you can't do this to me. I'm begging you, don't go through with it." But his pleas were in vain. Security entered, and as he were led away, the subject continued to voice his objections, albeit futilely. The recording of the interview was terminated, leaving a silence that spoke volumes about the grim realities faced by those within the SCP Foundation's walls. The next day, the subject is escorted to the experiment room, subjected to all sorts of monitoring modalities. From head to toe, the subject was completely covered in sensors and cables. All body metrics, sweat, nervous system, brain activity, heart, and all other vital organs were being recorded for possible anomalies. "You are all making a big mistake," the subject screams, a mantra to steel himself against the fear that snakes through his veins. Dr. Harrow, observing from behind the safety of the observation window, notes the initial defiance in D6439's posture. The way he seems almost to challenge the initial efforts made by the scientists working under his direction to activate the anomaly. As the experiments progressed, Elias and prisoner D6439, as Elias liked to address him as, formed an unspoken bond, a mutual understanding that transcended their roles. Elias Harrow was a mere chess piece in a game bigger than he was. His expressions were of fear and anger, just like the subject of the experiment. Each test, each attempt to activate SCP-3249 peeled back layers of humanity, revealing the raw, unvarnished truth of the existence of this undiscovered brain function. The initial exposure was a mere brush, a fleeting touch that left D6439 unmarked, at least to the naked eye. He emerged from the chamber with a smirk, his bravado intact. "Is that all?" he challenged, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. Elias watched, a knot of apprehension in his stomach. The documents had warned of SCP-3249's capricious nature, its ability to delve deep into the psyche, to unravel and reweave the fabric of a person's being. Yet nothing had prepared him for the transformation that unfolded. With each subsequent exposure, D6439's skepticism crumbled, eroded by the creeping realization that his reality was no longer his own. His body began to betray him, each cell a traitor, aligning with SCP-3249's inscrutable will. The transformation was not immediate, but its inevitability hung over them like a shroud. Dr. Harrow observed, his notes a lifeline in the chaos, described the protocol to follow in case of an unforeseen error in the experiment. SCP-3249A had promised so much, a glimpse into the potential of human evolution. But as the subjects succumbed to the anomaly, the horrifying reality of their work laid bare. The man who had entered the chamber, cocksure and defiant, faded away, replaced by someone, or better said, something else. The experiment took the greater part of a week, but in its culmination, the subject was allowed to rest for a day. No personnel had any contact with him, with the only exception of the security personnel who were constantly monitoring the subject, D6439, under camera surveillance. After he rested for a day, all the lead scientists of the experiment, Dr. Harrow and Dr. Steinberg, all gathered behind a mirror wall looking into the interview room, where Morris and the subject, now addressed as SCP-3249, were facing each other. "Hello again," the interviewer began, attempting to establish a familiar ground, though the response from the subject was anything but welcoming. "We haven't met before," the subject retorted sharply, its tone laced with a mix of defiance and clarity. It was a statement that challenged the very premise of the interviewer's approach. "We have. Are you unable to remember our first encounter?" Morris pressed on, trying to take the subject back to their pre-procedure interview about a week ago before the experiment began. SCP-3249's response was blunt and sinister in nature. "Oh no, I remember you fine, Morris. You and your colleagues, the one that put me through all this." There was an accusation in its voice, a clear indication of the resentment it harbored. The exchange quickly delved into the heart of SCP-3249's torment. "Would that not mean that we have met before?" Morris attempted to clarify, but SCP-3249 was not interested in semantics. "Remembering a movie actor doesn't mean you've met them. I remember you, but this is the first time we've spoken. Would you tell me?" Morris' follow-up question was cut short. "Shh. Do you even realize how lucky you are? From the day you're born, you just take everything for granted. You just enjoy everything, do whatever you want. Why do you do it? Why do you want to hurt us further?" "Who is us?" said Morris. "Oh, don't be so coy, you know what I'm talking about. You've obviously got your little knife games down to an art, so there must be others like me. Others who, right from the start, are shoved into the back seat, forced to watch the film of life play right before them but never allowed to direct. The ones who pulled the short straw," said SCP-3249 with a menacing tone. "Can you recall the past actions of the initial host?" Morris asked now, visibly annoyed at his inability to obtain concrete answers from the subject. "Oh yes, I most certainly can. I remember it all. I remember him cheating at his first science test, and how I had to be afraid of failing with him. I remember when he bought his first car, and the excitement I had to feel for a freedom I would never know. I remember it all, Morris." The subject continued. "What about you? Do you remember what you've done? Do you remember what your procedure does and to whom? I most certainly hope you do. Because if you do, the other one will too. When he wakes up, as I'm sure he will, very soon, he will finally get the chance to do the right thing. Then you will know what it's like to be in our shoes." "You do realize the one flaw with that statement, correct?" Morris said. "Oh? And what would that be?" the subject asked. Morris leans towards the subject's left ear and whispers something unintelligible. He then follows, saying, "The problem isn't just that I'm already awake. It's that you assume I care about what happens to you." "What? But why then? Why would you?" The interview is cut short by the security personnel rushing in to take the subject by force to his quarters, where he will remain for an undefined amount of time. Following the interview, details of the experiment have vanished, leaving behind no trace for further scrutiny. Even if records existed, only a select few within the Foundation would possess the clearance necessary to uncover the events that transpired afterward and the outcomes of the experiment. Morris, with 2 decades of service to the Foundation, was among the initial participants of the experiment. A decade ago, following the experiment's successful execution on him, the Foundation gave him a new identity, enveloping his story in layers of secrecy. The reasons behind his exposure to SCP-3249, which altered his consciousness, and his exact function within the Foundation's opaque structures remain speculative. Some within the Foundation conjecture that the alteration was intended to prepare him for a distinct, perhaps critical role. Yet the full truth remains securely locked away, perhaps never to be disclosed. Dr. Harrow, despite his reservations about the Foundation's ethical compass, chose to continue his association with them. He rationalized that aligning with the Foundation held more promise for his well-being and his family's than positioning himself against it. His understanding of the Foundation's capabilities and the fates of those who crossed it informed his decision, leaving him to navigate the murky waters of moral ambiguity while remaining within its fold.